Hello, you amazing cryptids. Today, I wanted to share some art I created for a character of mine named Reginald Ozrik. I worked on this piece on my stream, so pardon the overlay and me bouncing between my references. Also, when I stream, I tend to doodle things that I'm talking about, so some of that got left in, so please ignore anything that doesn't make sense, and that isn't my drawing. Reginald is a roleplay character of mine that I created for Final Fantasy XIV. He's my main. So all of the content that I do, I tend to just do on him. I find that Final Fantasy XIV isn't particularly alt-friendly. There's just so much that needs to be unlocked. I tried at one point to have multiple characters that I would bring through the story, and I don't know how other people do it. They're superheroes. I can't do it myself, so I just keep Reginald. He started out as a paladin since, in my experience, tanks were, never around. People don't play tanks that often. People tend to play DPS. After leveling him through the main story, I worked on some other classes for him, including like White Mage, because I do enjoy healing, but briefly I was in a guild that had a lot of tanks and healers, so I mained him as Machinist for a little while, and that was a really fun class. I really enjoyed playing that. Eventually there were some changes to Machinist, and I think around that time, or maybe a little after, Red Mage ended up coming out, so I made the switch to that. In Final Fantasy games, I love having at least one Red Mage in my party. I really like their versatility. I love being able to cast spells or choose to save mana and just whack things with my sword. Being able to also toss out a bit of healing is really nice. When I joined Final Fantasy, I got into a role-playing server and had some time to develop Reginald as a character. The few times that I've played in MMOs, I do tend to look for roleplay stuff. I like being able to connect with my character while going through the story and really imagining what their internal reactions are, their feelings, their state of mind, and how the story affects them as a person. And in Final Fantasy, having Reginald react to these things, I ended up not using those reactions for his character development because of the way the story works. It's really hard to incorporate into a roleplay character. Early on, Reginald was a typical paladin. He was kind and courageous and very good-natured and hardworking, but it never clicked with me. I liked my character and I liked the world, but Reginald has been a character I've always had trouble with just from the start, and I still do. I also had trouble starting out with this piece. You may see that I've been going over different poses and stuff, and I couldn't get it for a while. But then when I finally got the good pose, everything sort of kind of clicked. So I'm hoping that eventually things will just click with Reginald as a roleplay character as well. I really like drama in my storylines. I feel like stories with conflict are always more interesting to engage with. But I also like to balance that with traits that will make the character someone easy to engage with. So somebody who's dealt with perhaps traumatic experiences, but they're very social, or maybe they're less social but need assistance in some way, or need to interact with people in some way. Just finding that balance. Sometimes this works perfectly, and other times I get a little stuck. After thinking some things over, I worked out a clear storyline for my main character. Reginald Ozrik was born to Anthony and Claudette Ozrik in the Shroud, where they, with his older brother Sebastian, lived on a modest-sized farm. Anthony and Sebastian both spent time serving as a sultansworn. Anthony had retired from this position to settle down with Claudette, and Sebastian moved away from home to continue in his father's footsteps. Reginald, however, had issues as a child. His constitution wasn't great, and he suffered from regular migraines and nausea. In the world of Final Fantasy XIV, there is also something called the Echo. The Echo is a plot device for the hero to be able to see and hear things they weren't present for. And these things are usually crucial to the story, so we get to see them. It's a neat little device that they use, and every time this happens, your character will like grab their head and they'll get a flashback. It's kind of great. It's really fun. And some people give this ability to their roleplay characters. When I heard about that, I was in the process of trying to figure out Reginald's story, and I have a tendency to underpower my characters, so I gave him this ability, though to a very limited capacity. I actually get a little nervous when I make my characters. I don't want to make them too cool or too powerful. I just don't know why. So for Reginald, having the Echo so young, his parents worried that his mental health along with his physical health were just not very stable, and these sudden attacks of hearing and seeing things no one else could weren't really understood as a potential boon. They were disregarded as hallucinations. Living on the farm was fairly simple for Reginald. He had his chores, and he helped out a lot. He got on well with his parents, and he enjoyed working in the field and with the animals, and he learned a lot from that, but it just never really suited him. He wanted more. When he was in his late teens, Reginald decided it was time for him to finally leave home. He'd been wanting to see the world, he'd been wanting to go on adventures, and he was jealous of the things his brother could do that he just couldn't. Things he wasn't allowed to do because of how his family viewed him as weak. At this time, Reginald started taking odd jobs and saving money. He joined in some small underground fighting matches. As he made more money and more friends, Reginald's ego swelled. He started to game the system, setting up bets for the fights he was in, and either sabotaging the person he was fighting against or throwing the match completely, whichever would bring him more earnings. Being a bit of a pretty boy and playing up either his wins or being very humble about his losses, Reginald found the life of someone in the spotlight was alluring. People liked him. People didn't know his faults, and he didn't have to let them know. There was a control he found in half-truths and fake smiles. He leaned into this, and hard. He already had concern about how others viewed him, and during this time, he fell into a feedback loop that made his grip on his self-image the only thing that mattered to him. This all, of course, had to implode. People started finding out what he was doing during the fighting matches. People he associated with were realizing most of his words were lip service, and his actions were extremely self-serving. He lost many of his friends and alienated the others. Essentially, he was alone. He felt that the only way to get anywhere again was to reinvent himself. Of course, his parents didn't know any of the details, so when Reginald said he had work lined up and that he needed some armor, he was able to take his father's old Sultan Sworn armor. Reginald wore this armor for every job he could. He became a sellsword, not quite an adventurer, but someone who did take jobs that relied on combat skills. In his father's armor, he was often mistaken for a Sultan Sworn, and never once did he correct anyone. This is where I started really role-playing him. There were plenty of plots that continued to shape him, including a possession by a void scent. Basically, what could be described as something like a demon, but in Final Fantasy. Masquerading as a Sultan Sworn served him well for a while, but a loneliness crept in. Because of the walls he built around himself, he never connected with anyone. He never felt he could. He now had many things in his past he wasn't proud of. Then I had to unsub for a while. Life happens, and life was happening to me. I had to disconnect from the game and deal with work and mental health. I didn't know if or when I'd be able to roleplay Reggie again. I started to get the itch again, but still couldn't return, so I made him and another character of mine become roommates. I like to be able to have interactions between my characters so I can think about them and doodle them when I am not able to roleplay, so this worked out really well. Now that I'm back in the game, these two characters are in a very sloppy but open relationship. I adore shipping, but I'm also very cautious about who I play with. Usually, I don't like shipping my own characters together, but this is something that works for me, and I'm not really sure how I want to approach shipping and roleplay in Final Fantasy at the moment. And that's it. That's my Final Fantasy XIV OC, Reginald Ozrik. Well, having been a challenging character to figure out and still a challenge to play, I really love his storyline. I like his struggle with his sense of self and the growth that he has undergone, and hopefully will continue to go through. I'm also really proud of the art I made for him. I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you have, leave a like and a follow. That'll help me out a lot. And I'd love to know, do you have any OCs that struggle with control issues or their self-image? Comment below. I love, 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 love hearing about other people's OCs as well. And if you like this sort of video, let me know what OCs of mine you'd like to hear more about. Thank you for watching. You're amazing. Take care of yourself and don't be afraid to be creative.